everybody, and welcome to a mini update from the Extra Shift. My name is Chris. Don't have Brendan with me today, but do have the starting of the new studio set up going, so that's a big positive. Today is I just want to give a bit of an update because there's been a lot of garbage going around online. There's been a lot of back and forth over the Coyote situation. I know there's a lot of people that haven't really followed along with what's been happening with the Coyotes. They've seen bits and pieces, but haven't necessarily been keeping up to date with the minutiae. Let's face it, it's moving so quickly that why would you have kept up with all of it? It's very hard to keep up with. So what I've decided to do today is I've given us a brief summary of what's going on, a couple of bits of editorial of what I think is happening. I have been talking to people I know around the team as well. Also, I would say at the outset, if you really want to hear about stuff that's going on over there, friend of the show, Leah Merrill, and everyone over at the PHNX Coyotes on YouTube, go and check their stuff out. They are on the ground, they are there, and they are giving you like what's happening around that team. And some of their reporting is extremely good in particular, and some great writing. So I recommend you go there as well. But just sort of from bits and pieces, from all the different reports, from all the different conversations I've had, I wanted to give everyone a more thorough update as to what's actually been happening this week around the Coyotes. So let's start with the obvious. As was confirmed today, it's been reported all week, but confirmed today by Elliot Friedman, the NHL is hoping by Thursday this week to actually officially announce that the Arizona Coyotes will be relocating to Salt Lake City, Utah at the start of next season. And that this deal should be, if not finalized, I believe the term that Friedman used was, if not finalized, in a legal spot where no one can back out of it and it's basically agreed. So they're working with Alex Morello, the owner, and the league. It's not being dealt with directly between Utah and the Arizona ownership. It's actually all going through the NHL. I would possibly suggest that might be because they don't trust Morello to actually do anything. So I feel like the NHL has dragged him, and some of the information that came out today from Friedman confirms that the NHL has really played a major role in this happening. So the sale price is rumored to be around $1 billion, which leaves Alex Morello with a small $600 million profit. So he's making a lot of money off this. Then Ryan Smith, the owner of the Jazz, will buy the team from the league for 1.2. So what is happening, according to all the reports, is that Morello will sell to the league for $1 billion. The league will then sell to Salt Lake City for 1.2, which works out in some ways for them. It works out really well because the league's going to make, and we'll come back to this a bit later when I talk about the league's role in all of this, the league's actually going to make some money off this. The league will make $200 million, which, not bad for handling. Morello is also supposed to be negotiating a clause in there which will give him the first rights to an expansion franchise in Arizona if he can secure and build an NHL-capable rink in Arizona in the next 5 years. So there's a lot to unpack with all of that stuff. I think the first part of this is that there's been a lot of rumors around what's going on with the Coyotes for years now. And as I'll get into a bit later, this is a failing of ownership. This is not a failing of the team. I've seen one of the reasons I decided to do this update was I've seen in the Australian NHL fans Facebook page and on Twitter, there's been a lot of hockey doesn't work in the desert. See, the fans don't like it. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Lies. This is an organization that was failed not by its fans. This is an organization that was not failed even by the team. This is an organization failed by its ownership. Ownership failed to secure rinks. Ownership, as we'll get to in a little bit, put personal greed over benefit to the team. And that's where we've ended up, how we've ended up where we end up. So just to sort of go through the little bits of the minutiae around how this was being announced. It wasn't announced through statement, although if you've seen the Alex Morello statement today, it's a wonderful piece of garbage. Partly I call it garbage because it's all in capitals, and you can actually see the cursor where he screenshot what he did. So they didn't take the cursor off it. Secondly, he finishes all of this garbage with respectfully, which feels a bit rich coming from Alex Murillo from the last couple of days. But Greg Wyshynski and Emily Kaplan of ESPN sort of, along with Frank Saravelli, broke the story. So Frank Saravelli broke the story with Kaplan and Wyshynski that basically the team was going to be moved to Salt Lake City. The negotiations were going on. Wyshynski and Kaplan also pointed out the players got their updates via the media. There was no conversation between ownership at any level and the players initially. All of the information came out in the public, in the press. The players were told nothing. The players asked. The players were told nothing. There was a lot of back and forth over trying to get information. Again, nothing came out initially. It was then reported that Andre Turengay had been vocal. If you've listened to any of his interviews, you've seen that he was very publicly talking about this is disruptive, this is not great for the team, no one's giving us information, we want fairness. And apparently then internally, and Elliot Friedman even stressed today, once very, very aggressively demanded that Bill Armstrong give them an update. So Bill Armstrong, who had been at the Frozen Four for the NCAA, flew into the Oilers game at Edmonton, and as Craig Morgan of PHNX Sports reported, that before the Oilers game, Armstrong met with the team and basically said, look, the team's probably getting moved. I can't confirm it, but we're well down the path of the organization being moved. So the idea that the coach has got to be sort of that voice who tells the organization, you need to speak to us, especially since he's safe. Like, he'll be safe. He's got a contract. He's safe. But for those players in particular, and again, they're contracted players, but there's a whole range of issues that pop up around relocations. It's a bit of an issue. So it's good to see him sticking up for the team, first of all. It'll be interesting to see the fallout of the move. Now, the suggestion is, and this is where it gets really tricky, they're going to buy the franchise off the NHL, but they're not buying the franchise. The weirdness of this deal, because of the whole expansion thing, is that apparently, and remember, this popped up when the Coyotes moved from Winnipeg. There was this whole argument of, do the Winnipeg Jets own the Winnipeg Jets history, or do the Arizona Coyotes own the Winnipeg Jets history? Well, apparently in this deal, the Coyotes history will stay in Arizona, and they're buying the contracts and the rights to the franchise, but not the franchise. That's what the talk is. And it's all being bought by Ryan Smith, who owns the Utah Jazz and Real Salt Lake in the MLS. So the organization itself is officially dormant until an expansion comes in, which feels weird because the expansion, even though it might be owned by Morello, I mean, we'll come to will it be owned by Morello, is a different team. It's a different organization. It's in the same spot, but it is a completely different organization. So I don't know, and I don't know how Coyotes fans would feel about that if a new team picked up in Arizona, if they'd want the records to stay or not, or if they'd want those to be transported over, or what they'd want out of that. That would be something for the fan base really at large to have a broader conversation about. I've got doubts about Morello having the franchise in the first place, but we will come to that. Let's talk about Salt Lake City. So Salt Lake City, Utah. It's certainly a scene change for people who have been based in Arizona. You've been in warm weather, warm climates. You know, Phil Kessel famously, you know, the whole idea was Phil will go down to Arizona and really enjoy the golf. And, you know, a lot of people have talked about the fact that Arizona as a place to go is desirable. How do players feel about going to very cold Salt Lake City, Utah, which is a very, very different scene to anywhere in Arizona? I think that remains to be seen. The arena they're going to be playing in. So a lot of people, obviously, Mullet is where they've been playing at the moment, the home of ASU. Not a big arena at all. We all know that. Everyone knows they're playing out of a very small college arena. They would be going to the Delta Center The Delta Center is where the Jazz play. 14,000 seats if you put it into hockey configuration. It's also going to be only younger than Madison Square Garden and the Saddle Dome. It's an old building. It was built in 1991. It's an old building. Now, Salt Lake City has a bid in for the 2034 Winter Olympics. That feels like we're going to build a stadium as part of that, and we'll move the team there. But that's down the line. So they're going to be playing out of the Delta Center when they move. So they're not playing in a state-of-the-art modern arena. They're playing out of an older arena, and one that is configured for basketball with some adjustment for hockey. And you lose, I think it's 20,000 in basketball configuration. It's 14,000 in hockey configuration. So you're going to lose seats. It's going to be an interesting situation to move into that older arena. I mean, and while Mullet is by no means good, the state-of-the-art stuff back, for the dressing rooms, everyone thinks of the first lot of dressing rooms with like the curtains and stuff like that. All of those things have been upgraded off ice since they moved into Mullet. So that's a whole situation unto itself. We'll see what happens with that. The metropolitan population as well of Salt Lake City it's 1.25 mil. So it's not one of the bigger cities. I think it's 46th, 47th in terms of local area for US cities. It feels really interesting because there was a lot of chatter this week end of last week about Houston again, and Houston basically went, we're not ready now, but we will be in a couple of years' time. There's a lot of people in Quebec City right now going, well, I mean, look, if you move them to there, why not Quebec? I feel this is interesting for a couple of reasons there. I think that, one of the arguments with Quebec is they want a new arena in Quebec. And it's very hard to say we want a new arena when by the same token you're sending them to the Delta Center. That feels a bit rich. There's people demanding another team, obviously, in Toronto. There's a lot of talk about, putting another team up there. I wouldn't do that yet. I think the Canadian market is having some issues of its own. Somebody put out an argument the other day, an article the other day going, when's Canada, I think it was TSN, put out, when's Canada going to get another franchise? And I looked at that and thought, the Winnipeg Jets are currently winning and are playing really well, and they can't fill their arena. And we'll talk about Winnipeg because Winnipeg is central to this story as well. Because, of course, the first Winnipeg Jets became the Arizona Coyotes. And then when they got their franchise back after the Thrashers got moved, Gary Bettman warned the market, I have moved this team once. I will move them again. You need to turn up. And Winnipeg has had struggles in getting people in that building. So there's been a lot of, well, why not another team in Canada? Support what you've got. Like, make what you've got work before you get another one. That's kind of, I think, where the NHL is on that, but they can't really say that because you can't really upset the Canadian fan base too much because they don't react very well to that when you do. The NHLPA. The PA has been very quiet so far, apart from to say they've been monitoring the situation. Allegedly, there was something about they weren't happy with the way the players had been notified or not notified. I'm interested in this because one of the angles that hasn't really been discussed yet is that a lot of this feels like Marty Walsh is doing, the head of the PA. When all of the stuff happened around the loss of the Tempe vote for the Coyotes, Marty Walsh came out and basically demanded that the league needs to move this team to Utah. He said at the time on February 3rd, he said that it would absolutely be supported by players, even the ones who would be uprooted mid-contract. A Utah franchise could be another Golden Knights or Seattle Kraken. I don't believe that. I don't believe that for a second. It's a relocated franchise. Those two franchises had expansion rules. Those two franchises took advantage of expansion rules. This franchise is an existing franchise moving contracts. They've said they're prepared to spend to the cap and they're prepared to spend big money to get free agents in to be successful early. So that might be good. But that's not because they're in Utah. That's just because it's an ownership group that said they'll spend money, which is what part of the problem's been in Arizona. I don't think that that's right from Marty Walsh to suggest that this is another Golden Knights or another Kraken. I think that it's naive because I don't think any expansion team is going to have that level of success again because you don't fall for that a third time. Like, you don't fall for that a third time. Also, with rights deals coming up and all of those sorts of the CBA stuff coming up, I think that a lot of the contracts that players might have been trying to get players out from under, I get the feeling we might get another compliance buyout alongside the new CBA, or at least some leeway for teams to move players on for some of these contracts. Also interesting to see what this does for the cap, because there's an extra $200 million coming into the coffers. But for me, the NHLPA do have some questions to answer. Now, the first part of this is, if you are a player with a no trade and a modified no trade, so you have a list of teams that you've got to give, there will be players that had Arizona on no, but might want to go to Salt Lake City. That could be a thing. That's easier because they can waive. But what happens if they had Arizona on there as, yes, you can move me there, but they do not want to move to Salt Lake City? Are these players allowed to resubmit their list? Is this a resubmission thing? What is the contractual obligation there? You know, the fact that players, that might be an issue for players. I suggest there might be players contacting the union and going, what are we doing? Is there a leeway here? What do we get here? It's going to be interesting to see if there are changes to no moves and no trades post the relocation. Which brings me to the why. Now, again, I said at the outset of this, there's been a lot of stuff this week about hockey doesn't work in Arizona. It doesn't work in the desert. Well, it doesn't work in the desert. It's a lie because, Vegas exists. It doesn't work in Arizona. I would argue that it definitely works in Arizona. All you've got to do is look at all of the junior programs. All you've got to do is look at all the hockey talent coming out of, the Toronto Maple Leafs right now would be, don't know where they'd be if it wasn't for Arizona junior hockey. It works. Like, it genuinely works. And look, Andrew Berkshire made that point about wealth and Zach Hyman, and I'm not here to debate the merits on that, but you've got a lot of, if you can afford to play hockey in the desert, you've possibly got a bit more of that ability as well financially to sort of get the best. So I think there's definitely a market there. There's a big market there. It's been shown when they've been successful, there is a market there. The failing is not the fans. The failing is not even the on-ice product as much as that's been all over the place. That's been all over the place down to one thing. It's ownership. The failing of this organization and the moving of this organization is an ownership failing. And when I say ownership, I'm not just referring to the people that have owned the team in terms of the individual owners. It is an NHL failing. And Gary Bettman in particular. The issues, look, the Coyotes were kind of in trouble when Steve Ellman bought the team and then decided to move them out of the arena that they shared with the Suns, where there were like obstructed view seats, but it was in the middle of Phoenix and, very populated area. It's the downtown area, easy access, lots of food, lots of venues, it was like an easy venue to get to. And Ellman decided, for reasons linked to commercial property that he wanted to buy, move the team to Glendale. Glendale is about 90, from my understanding, it's about 90 minutes. Again, if anyone knows specifically, correct me, but about 90 minutes from Phoenix. It's hard to get to. There's a ring road that makes it really difficult to enter. There's not really any public transport options. And basically on a weeknight, you weren't going to get people from the major metropolitan areas to Glendale to watch hockey on a weeknight. It was just, the round trip would have been too much. So attendance has started to plummet, and then you got fans going, fair-weathered fans, they don't go to the arena. They're they'd be traveling 3 hours round trip on a weeknight. That's not on. That's just really hard for families to justify in particular. So you can't justify that. And then obviously you get this current ownership group. But I think that for me, the hallmark of the problem for the Coyotes with ownership, it relates to land. It's land grabbing, and it's thirst for land. The Elman Group wanted to have land in Glendale. They wanted to add developments there. The Alex Morello thing, the Tempe thing was all about condos and shopping centers, and we'll put a rink in there too, and we're going to build an entire. He basically wanted to have a large complex. The auction of land coming up, which was the whole saving, like less than a week ago, Morello was spruiking this. I'm going to buy a parcel of land in this land auction coming up, and that's where we're putting the rink, and that's where we're going to put all of our stuff. He was sprouting that at the same time he'd already started the conversations around the sale. In fact, it was sort of leaked out that the conversations had initially broke out late January. It was the first time it started to come out. It's all about land. People have owned the Coyotes not to own the Coyotes. People have owned the Coyotes to try to buy land using the Coyotes as the Trojan horse. This is not a failing of the local fans. This is not a failing of hockey in Arizona. This is a failing of owners who used a hockey club to try to make more money off land development. This is what this is. And I'll quote Leah Merrill from PHNX Sports, again, friend of the show. She's been on a number of times. Still hopeful we'll see her again, but obviously they're very busy. Coyotes fandom has never been an easy ride. The selfishness, greed, ignorance, and lack of caring and egregious mistakes by various ownership groups have led to where things are today. And I think Leah says that absolutely perfectly. It's a failing of ownership, and it's a land grab. That's what this is. It's a land grab. So I said this was a failing of the league. Let's get to it. Is it time that the NHL has a fit and proper person style test? And I know they've got some ownership agreements, but basically, if the board of governors feel like they're getting their money, they'll approve people for ownership of a team. Gary Bettman has form. Remember, Gary Bettman took over the league in 1993, and one of the first things he oversaw was the sale of the New York Islanders to a man with no money, John Spanos. And it literally got to the point where he was running the team before they worked out he actually had no money, and they managed to pull the team back from the abyss. But a man who had no money literally was running the New York Islanders under Gary Bettman's watch. This is the man who moved the Jets to Arizona in the first place, then came back by moving the Thrashers, a team he started, back to Winnipeg, and threatening the fans on the day that he announced it with, I've moved a team once, I will move a team again if you don't turn up. This is Gary and the NHL have owned the Coyotes a couple of times in this run. Bettman, rather than the league trying to really, publicly at least, find somebody to buy out Morello, they just seem to be, we're ride or die with Morello until the bitter end. And then this gets here, and they just go, you've got to sell it now. The league is going to make $200 million. The cynic in me, and again, somebody will clip this and go, look at the conspiracy theorist. The cynic in me suggests that it's not bad to get $200 million when, as Brendan and I mentioned in the last podcast, the Canadian rights are coming up in the next 12 months. And you've already got one of the two broadcasters jettisoning Monday night games next year to Amazon because they really can't afford the rights deals that they agreed. And that next Canadian rights deal may not be vaguely what they thought they were getting because the Canadian media market's not what it was. Obviously, they're desperately hoping that the Oilers or the Leafs can win a cup because that will get TV through the roof. But if that doesn't happen, they're going to have dwindling ratings again for a Stanley Cup playoffs, and it's hard for TSN to justify the rights. Sportsnet keeps on making noises like they don't want to be involved in the bidding war this time. So they may not get what they thought they were going to get for the TV rights on an increase. So an extra $200 million for handling the sale of the club, probably helpful at this point in time. The other thing I would add here, just sort of a bit more cynically, is if they've guaranteed the rights to an expansion franchise should a rink happen, he's not getting that franchise for free. He has to return the $1 billion that they pay him, and then also will have to pay an expansion fee. So they stand to get about $1.8 to $2 billion to put a team back in Arizona if Morello comes through. So the league stands to make a lot of money off selling the team in Arizona and then possibly selling a team back to Arizona. The league also stands to make a lot of money if they've basically given everybody the deadline for the next expansion, 5 years. If Morello's not going to come through, Houston, for example, now has a timer. The next expansion's in 5 years. So be ready. So I think one of two things. I don't believe that Alex Morello is going to exercise his option. I'm wondering if there's a clause in the contract that prevents him from selling his rights to the expansion. Because I could full well see Morello selling his rights to expand to somebody else to make more money for himself. That's something I could foresee. I also think that he could sell it to, say, Houston. He could sell it to someone in Quebec City. He could make money off the idea of selling his first option, his right of refusal, if he still has it. Now, again, it might be purely conditional. He might not be able to sell it because it might be 100% conditional on that rink. But these are the things that will come out in the next week. Now, a couple of questions just quickly. So the main question that sort of got asked was, Jason Richards asked, do you think the league needs to realign if Utah joins next year? The Coyotes are in the Central, and I think Utah will fit in just fine. I don't think there'll be a realignment. Again, I think if the Coyotes hadn't have been moved out of the Pacific previously, then yes. But Seattle going into the Pacific and moving the Coyotes out means that Salt Lake City will just that'll make absolutely perfect sense. So I don't feel the need for a move. You've got Colorado, you've got St. Louis, you've got Salt Lake City, you've got that sort of hub there. It actually makes sense for me. So in terms of a realignment, no. The next realignment happens at the next expansion. And it's going to be because the interesting thing for everybody to consider is that the most recent expansion franchises, the Golden Knights and the Seattle Kraken, have both been into the Pacific. So there's two Western expansions there. Houston would be a Western expansion as well, and I suspect that Houston's next. It's either going to be Houston or Arizona, which is another Western expansion, which then means you get to a point where do you need to dump somebody to the east? That's a whole other question mark. I don't know the answer to that question there. I think that the alignment stuff is a 5 years down the line question. It's not a now question. Now it all works. You just swap them out. Down the line, I think you do need to do realignment, but that's because you're loading up the West, and it just seems like every team they're looking to add is to be added to the West. So next expansion, I think a team that's already in the West heads east. That's probably where we're sitting, but that's for the next expansion, not for this one. If anyone else has got any other questions, throw them in there now. Otherwise, we're sort of going to move on because this is only supposed to be a bit of a brief update on the stuff. Brendan and myself will be back probably at the end of this week once we know the playoff picture to talk a lot more about the Coyotes. There will also be, in some way, shape, or form, another major Coyotes update with, again, people who are on the ground and very familiar with the situation. But wanted to make sure that everyone had a bit more of an update, because again, I just got sick and tired of seeing a lot of the stuff that was going around about it's just because hockey doesn't work there. Hockey works there. What doesn't work there is land grabbing ownership. So I'll leave that with you for now. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, be it live or on catch-up, or if you comment. It's really appreciated. Until next time, I've been Chris, and we will catch you all later.